You're not always waiting on another sign. See, sometimes you already know what God told you to do. You're just terrified of what it might cost you. You probably found yourself saying, what if they reject me? What if I fail? So in this video, I'm going to show you why obedience can feel so frightening, how to know when fear is delaying you, and how to take the next step even when you don't feel ready. So let's talk about it. Now let's be honest, there are some things you're still praying about, and I get that. Like you don't know what to do yet. You need wisdom. You probably need direction. But there are other things that you've been calling confusion that really aren't confusion. You know what he told you to do. Write the book, start the business, end the relationship, apply for the job. But instead of obeying, you keep saying, I'm just waiting on God. But God might be saying, I already told you what to do. You don't need another sign. You need enough courage to act on the last thing he made clear. So let me tell you when this became real for me. See, starting this YouTube channel scared me more than I expected. Now, I stood in front of soldiers. I preached in front of churches. I've been deployed to combat zone. But somehow, sitting alone in a room, looking into a camera and pressing record hit different. Because when you're preaching in church, somebody is already in the room. When you're speaking at an event, somebody invited you. But YouTube, man, you can spend hours preparing a message, recording it, editing it, creating a thumbnail, fixing the title, uploading it, and then wonder whether anybody is even going to click on it. Like I would sit in front of a camera with the lights on, the microphone connected, the message prepared, and still find a reason not to begin. I would say things like, maybe I need better equipment. Maybe I should wait until I'm more prepared. And sometimes I spent so much time trying to make everything perfect that perfection became my excuse for not moving. But the real issue wasn't the camera. It wasn't the equipment. It wasn't even the algorithm. I was afraid. I was afraid that if I put my heart into a message and nobody would watch it. I was afraid that I'll look foolish, awkward. I was afraid that people who already knew me would look at the channel and think, who's this guy? Who do he think he is? And let's be honest, sometimes the people who know you make obedience harder than strangers do. Strangers only see who you're becoming, but people who know you remember who you used to be. So when God started pushing me towards creating content for people who are struggling and trying to find their way back to him, I knew the assignment made sense. I lived through pain, addiction, failure, trauma, and experienced his rebuild. And I knew that there were people who needed to hear that their story wasn't over. But knowing the assignment didn't make me feel ready to do it. And I kept thinking, what if I'm too late? What if the channel doesn't grow? What if I put the video out there and only a few people watch? And then the Holy Spirit had to confront me with something. Did God tell you to be famous, or did God tell you to be faithful? That hit me because I was measuring obedience by the outcome. You see, I thought the video was only successful if thousands of people watch. But what if one person was sitting in their car, ready to give up, and that message reminded them that God hadn't forgot about them? What if one man struggling with shame heard me tell the truth about my own life and realized he wasn't disqualified? Would that one person be worth me pressing record? Yes, they would. So I had to stop waiting to feel confident. I had to stop treating the algorithm like it had more authority than the assignment God gave me. And I pressed record. Now, was I completely comfortable? No. Did every video perform the way I hoped? No. Have I questioned titles, thumbnails, views, whether I'm doing this right? Absolutely. But every time I upload, I'm reminding fear that you don't run this channel. Every time I speak into this camera, I'm saying, I may not know who's going to watch, but I know why I'm showing up. And that's what obedience looked like sometimes. It's not dramatic. It's me sitting in a room on an iPhone, a microphone, a message in my heart, and fear giving me thousands of reasons not to begin. And that experience taught me something. You don't become confident and then obey. Obedience is often how confidence gets built. So the first step in what God told you to do may feel uncomfortable. Your plan may not be perfect, but you'll never discover what God can do through your obedience while you're still sitting there refusing to move. See, sometimes the breakthrough isn't on the other side of another confirmation. Sometimes it's on the other side of a trembling yes. Now, that experience changed the way I understood fear because I used to think fear meant stop, something's wrong. But sometimes fear doesn't mean you're moving in the wrong direction. See, sometimes fear means that you're leaving the version of yourself that always needed control. See, obedience feels hard because you want God to tell you how everything's going to turn out. You don't only want direction, you want guarantee. God, if I leave, will something better come? If I start, will I succeed? If I obey you, will you make sure I don't get hurt? But God doesn't always answer those questions before he asks for your obedience. Sometimes he gives you direction without giving you the details. And that's why obedience can feel dangerous. It requires you to release control over an outcome you deeply care about. You would obey if the money would work out. You would obey if you knew you wouldn't fail. You would obey if you knew you wouldn't be embarrassed. But faith doesn't say I'll obey once I know how this is going to end. Faith says, I don't know how this is going to end, but I know who told me to move. And let me tell you something about fear. Now, fear is clever. It doesn't always say, I'm afraid. Sometimes fear learns Christian language. It says, I'm seeking confirmation. I'm praying about timing. But how long are you going to keep praying about something God already made clear? See, in Judges chapter 6, we meet Gideon, right? Israel was being oppressed by the Midianites, and Gideon was hiding. Then the angel of the Lord appeared and said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Wait, that's strange, because Gideon wasn't standing on the battlefield. He was hiding. He didn't look like a warrior. He didn't feel like a warrior. As a matter of fact, he started asking questions. If God is with us, why has all this happened? How can I save Israel? I'm the least in my family. See, Gideon had a list of reasons why he wasn't qualified. But God didn't answer every insecurity. He said, go in the strength you have. Not the strength you'll have 5 years from now. Not the confidence you're waiting to feel. The strength you have right now. And I know that's something that some of y'all don't want to hear. You're waiting to become somebody else before you obey. You saying, when I have enough money, when I know more scripture, when I feel qualified. But God may be saying, go with what you have. See, Gideon didn't become courageous and then obey. He obeyed while he was still wrestling with fear. And this is important because God didn't shame Gideon for being afraid, but he also didn't allow fear to become Gideon's permanent excuse. You see, God met him in fear and then called him forward. Now, obedience also feels hard because it may require you to leave an identity that once made you feel safe. See, for Gideon, that identity was, I'm the least. My family is weak. People like me don't lead. For you, it may sound like this. I'm not a leader. I'm not disciplined. I always been this way. My family doesn't do things like that. I'm too old. I made too many mistakes. But what happened when God's call conflict with the identity you accepted? You either obey who God says you're becoming, or you remain loyal to who fear says you always been. And that's why obedience can feel like losing yourself. Because sometimes you're not always leaving a place. You're leaving a version of yourself. The version that stayed quiet to avoid criticism. The version that said yes because it might upset somebody. The version that hides because visibility feels dangerous. The version that uses the past as proof that the future can't be different. See, obedience doesn't only change your circumstances, it confronts your identity. But there's another reason why obedience feels hard. See, sometimes you know the right decision is going to cost you something. And the fact that it's costly doesn't automatically mean it's wrong. See, Gideon's first assignment wasn't to fight the Midianite army. See, God told him to tear down his father's altar. And that meant obedience was about to become personal. It would affect his whole family, his community, his reputation. And the Bible says Gideon did it at night because he was afraid. Did you hear that? He obeyed afraid. Now, it may not have looked bold. It may not have looked dramatic, but it was obedience. See, sometimes we think obedience only counts if we feel powerful while doing it. But maybe your hands are shaking. Maybe your voice is trembling. Maybe you have to rehearse what you're going to say 10 times. Maybe you're terrified while you submit the application. But that doesn't cancel the obedience. You don't have to feel fearless. You just have to decide that fear doesn't get the final vote. And Gideon's obedience disrupted people. See, when the community saw the altar had been destroyed, they became angry. And that's another thing nobody tells you. Your obedience may upset people who benefited from your disobedience. See, the person who enjoyed your silence may not celebrate your honesty. The person who depended on you having no boundaries may not celebrate your growth. The people who were comfortable with the old version of you may call the new version selfish, prideful, and different. Sometimes obedience will make you look foolish to people who don't know what God told you. Like, can you imagine if Noah had social media and posted about his assignment? God told me to build an ark because there's a flood coming. The comments would have been brutal. Like, bro, who told you God said that? Like, oh man, here we go again, another false prophet. But Noah didn't need the comments to agree with what God had already confirmed. And neither do you. Listen to what it says in Genesis 6:22. It says Noah did everything exactly as God commanded him. So people may laugh because they can't see what God showed you. They may even criticize the assignment because they were never given the blueprint. But watch this. Your responsibility is not to convince everybody. Your responsibility is to keep building. So keep building that business. Keep writing that book. Start that ministry. Break the cycle. Heal your family. So stop explaining the blueprint to people who never heard the instructions and just keep building your ark. So yes, obedience can cost you comfort. It can cost you approval, but disobedience has a cost too. See, the question isn't whether you'll pay a price. The question is, which price are you willing to pay? See, disobedience may preserve your comfort today, but it can steal your confidence tomorrow. And every time you ignore what God told you, something inside of you becomes quieter. You pray for change while continuing the behavior that prevents it. You keep asking God to open doors while refusing to walk through the one he already opened. And then resentment begins to grow. You start becoming angry at God for a life you haven't been willing to participate in changing. And I know that's hard to hear, but it's real. See, sometimes we're not stuck because God hasn't spoken. We're stuck because obedience would require us to release something we're still trying to protect. Your comfort and your control. See, God saw something in Gideon that Gideon couldn't see in himself. But Gideon didn't discover it while hiding. He discovered it while obeying. And that's why obedience is worth it. It introduces you to the person that fear has been hiding from you. See, you don't know how strong you are until you make the decisions you thought would break you. You don't know how God can use your voice until you finally speak. You don't know how much peace is possible until you stop returning to chaos. You don't know what God placed inside of you until you stop using insecurity as a hiding place. See, there's a more confident you on the other side of beginning. But here's what makes obedience even more important. See, your yes is not only to change your life. See, somebody else might be waiting on what God placed inside of you. See, Gideon's obedience didn't only free Gideon, it helped free a nation. And your obedience may be connected to your children, your marriage, your family, your community. Somebody may need the story that you're afraid to tell. Somebody may need the business you're afraid to start. Somebody may need the book you haven't finished yet. And that's why I wrote my book, Never Broken, How God Rebuilds What Life Tried to Shatter. See, writing this book required me to stop viewing my story only through the lens of what it cost me. I had to start thinking about who it could help. The addiction, the trauma, the pressure, the failure, the rebuilding. I could have hid that. I could have hid those parts of my life to protect my image. But then somebody who feels damaged might never hear that God can still rebuild people. See, your obedience may feel private, but it can have a public impact. See, you're focused on how afraid you feel, but God may be focused on the person who will find freedom because you finally said yes. Now I know what you might be thinking. This sounds good, but I still don't know how everything's going to work. And you're right. You may not know, but obedience doesn't require you to understand the entire journey. It just requires you to take the next step. So let me give you a few practical steps that you can apply today in order to help you along this journey. Stop hiding your fear behind vague language. So finish this sentence. I know God is leading me towards blank, but I'm afraid that blank. For example, I know I need to set boundaries, but I'm afraid they'll leave. I know I need to share my story, but I'm afraid people will judge me. I know I need to begin, but I'm afraid I'll fail. See, fear becomes powerful when it remains undefined. See, fear wants you to imagine everything that can go wrong over the next 5 years. But God gives you grace for the steps in front of you. And let me give you a bonus. Trust God with what happens next. Your responsibility is obedience. The outcome belongs to God. So you may not feel ready, but do it afraid. You may lose people, but do it afraid. You may not have every answer, but do it afraid. You may have to begin with less than you want to, but guess what? Do it afraid. Because the goal isn't to become a person who never feels fear. The goal is to become a person who no longer allows fear to make every decision. See, you're not weak because you're afraid. You're human. See, Gideon was afraid when he approached the battle, but fear didn't get the right to end of his story. And it doesn't get the right to end of yours. You don't need another year of delay. You don't need another excuse. You don't need another sign for something God had already made clear. So take the step. Do it with tears in your eyes. Do it with questions in your mind. Do it while your heart is pounding, but do it. Now, if this message resonated with you, do me a favor, like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to grab my book, Never Broken: How God Rebuilds What Life Tried to Shatter. This book is for anyone who is tired of allowing trauma, rejection, addiction, failure, fear to determine what happens next. The link is in the description below. And would you please do me a favor and send this message to someone who knows what God told them to do, but they keep waiting to feel ready. Y'all stay blessed.